The bridge of the UES Defiance fell silent as Captain Sarah Chen watched the intercepted transmission. Her knuckles turned white as she gripped the command chair, forcing herself to witness what the Galactic Empire called justice. 23 human women, prisoners of war captured during the failed defense of New Geneva Colony, stood in shackles before a jeering crowd of alien dignitaries. The Zephyrian announcer's voice carried through the ship's speakers with sickening enthusiasm. Citizens of the Empire, today we demonstrate the fate that awaits all who dare oppose our righteous expansion. These primitive humans thought they could resist our divine mandate. Sarah's second-in-command, Commander Torres, reached for the transmission controls. Captain, perhaps we shouldn't— No. Sarah's voice cut through the bridge like a blade. Every human in this fleet needs to see this. Record everything. On the massive view screen, the prisoners stood with their heads held high despite their circumstances. Lieutenant Maria Santos, a fighter pilot Sarah had personally trained, met the camera's gaze with defiant eyes. Beside her, Dr. Elizabeth Wong, the colony's chief medical officer who had treated wounded without regard for species, maintained her dignity even as the Zephyrian executioner raised his weapon. The Empire had made this broadcast galaxy-wide, transmitting it across every human settlement, every neutral world, and every corner of civilized space. They wanted everyone to witness their power, to see what happened to those who resisted the inevitable march of imperial expansion. Admiral Marcus Webb's face appeared on Sarah's personal comm screen, his weathered features twisted with barely contained rage. Captain Chen, returned to Earth immediately. Emergency War Council in 72 hours. Sir, we're 3 days out from the Kepler system. Intelligence suggests there might be survivors. That's an order, Captain. The entire fleet is being recalled. Webb's voice carried a weight Sarah had never heard before. What we just witnessed changes everything. As the Defiance changed course, Sarah walked through the ship's corridors. The crew moved with grim purpose, their faces reflecting the same cold fury she felt burning in her chest. In the mess hall, she found dozens of sailors watching the recorded transmission on repeat, memorizing every face, every detail. They think this will break us, Chief Petty Officer Jackson said without looking up. They think we'll surrender now that we've seen what they're capable of. Sarah placed a hand on the veteran sailor's shoulder. What do you think, Chief? Jackson's eyes met hers, and she saw something that made her blood run cold. It wasn't fear or despair. It was the look of a predator that had just been given permission to hunt. I think they just made the biggest mistake in galactic history, ma'am. The journey back to Earth felt like an eternity. Every hour brought new reports from across human space. Recruitment centers were overwhelmed with volunteers. Defense contractors were working around the clock. The Colonial Defense Force had tripled in size overnight as civilians abandoned their lives to join the war effort. But it wasn't just humans who were responding. The transmission had been received by every species in the galaxy, and many were horrified by what they'd witnessed. The Altarian Republic issued a formal condemnation. The Andromedan Trade Federation suspended all commercial agreements with the Empire. Even species that had remained neutral for centuries were reconsidering their positions. As Earth grew larger in the viewports, Sarah received another priority transmission. This time it was from Dr. Yuki Tanaka, the lead researcher at the Prometheus Institute. The elderly scientist's face was haggard as if she hadn't slept in days. Captain Chen, I'm transmitting classified files directly to your personal storage. Project Phoenix has been given unlimited authorization. Everything we've been working on for the past decade, every theoretical weapon, every experimental technology, it's all been green-lit for immediate deployment. Sarah's breath caught. Project Phoenix was humanity's most closely guarded secret, a collection of technologies that pushed the boundaries of known physics. Technologies that had been deemed too dangerous, too destructive for conventional warfare. Doctor, are you certain? Once we crossed that line, they crossed it first, Tanaka's voice was steel. When they executed those women, when they broadcast it as entertainment, they showed us exactly what kind of enemy we're facing. We respond with everything we have or we die as a species. The files downloaded to Sarah's personal datapad, each one marked with security classifications she'd never seen before. Temporal displacement weapons, gravitational singularity bombs, neural disruption fields that could disable entire fleets. And at the bottom of the list, something called Project Daybreak, a weapon system that carried the highest possible classification. Earth's orbital defense platforms came into view, But something was different. Construction ships swarmed around the stations like angry insects, installing new weapons systems, expanding defensive grids. The planet itself seemed to pulse with activity, every shipyard working at maximum capacity. As the Defiance docked at Luna Station, Sarah was met by a sight that would stay with her forever. The observation deck was packed with off-duty personnel, all watching Earth's surface through telescopes and view screens. The night side of the planet blazed with lights, not the usual warm glow of cities, but the harsh glare of industrial complexes operating at maximum output. Humanity was transforming itself into something it had never been before, a species united in righteous fury, channeling every ounce of creativity and determination into a single purpose. The execution of 23 women had done what no political leader, no military campaign, no diplomatic initiative had ever accomplished. It had turned humanity into a weapon. Admiral Webb was waiting in the docking bay, along with representatives from every major human government. The man who had served in 3 previous conflicts looked older than his years, but his eyes burned with the same cold fire Sarah had seen in her crew. "Captain Chen, welcome home," he said formally. Then his voice dropped to a whisper only she could hear. "They wanted to send a message. Now we're going to send one back. And when we're done, the Galactic Empire will learn why you never corner a human being unless you're prepared to face what they become when they have nothing left to lose." As Sarah disembarked, she carried with her the weight of those classified files, and the knowledge that humanity was about to unleash something the galaxy had never seen. The Empire thought they were fighting a primitive species, a collection of scattered colonies that would crumble under pressure. They were about to discover their fatal error. The emergency session of the United Earth Council convened in the deepest bunker beneath Geneva, 5 kilometers underground and shielded from any conceivable attack. Representatives from every human world sat around the circular table, their faces illuminated by holographic displays showing casualty reports, resource assessments, and intelligence briefings. Secretary General Elena Vasquez stood at the center of the chamber, her silver hair reflecting the harsh light of the war room displays. Behind her, the execution footage played on a loop, ensuring that no one in the room could forget why they were there. "The Galactic Empire has made their position clear," Vasquez began, her voice echoing in the chamber. "They view us as insects to be exterminated for their entertainment. They broadcast the murder of our people as a celebration. They expect us to surrender, to kneel before their superior technology and accept our fate as slaves or corpses." A murmur rippled through the assembly. Marcus Kim, representative from the Tau Ceti colonies, leaned forward. "Madam Secretary, our conventional forces are outnumbered 300 to 1. The Empire has been expanding for millennia. They have technologies we can barely comprehend." "Which is exactly what they expect us to think," interrupted Dr. Tanaka as she entered the chamber. The elderly scientist moved with surprising urgency, carrying a quantum storage device that pulsed with encrypted data. "For the past 50 years, we've been preparing for this moment. Not preparing for war, preparing for survival." She activated the chamber's central hologram, and the room filled with technical schematics that made several representatives gasp. Weapon systems that bent space-time, ships that could phase between dimensions, artificial intelligence networks that could process battlefield data faster than any organic mind. "Project Phoenix isn't just about superior weapons," Tanaka continued. "It's about thinking beyond the conventional rules of warfare. The Empire conquers through overwhelming force and technological superiority. They've done it for thousands of years against hundreds of species, but they've never fought humans." General Morrison, Earth's highest-ranking military officer, stood slowly, his mechanical arm, a souvenir from the Mars Rebellion 20 years prior, whirred softly as he gestured toward the displays. "What makes us different, Doctor? What makes you think we can succeed where every other species has failed?" Tanaka's smile was predatory. "Because every other species fought the Empire's war by the Empire's rules. They met force with force, technology with technology. They tried to out-imperial the Empire." She paused, letting her words sink in. "We're going to fight a human war." The hologram shifted, showing battle simulations that made the assembled representatives lean back in their chairs. Human ships didn't engage in traditional fleet actions. Instead, they flickered in and out of existence, striking critical targets before vanishing into slip space. Entire enemy fleets simply ceased to function as their AI systems were compromised by human neural viruses. Space stations imploded as their own power cores were turned against them. The Empire's strength is their size and their standardization, Admiral Webb explained, stepping forward to join the presentation. Every ship is built to the same specifications. Every AI follows the same protocols. Every weapon system operates on the same principles. It makes them powerful, but it also makes them predictable. Representative Sarah Foster from the Luna colonies raised her hand. Admiral, these projections show casualty rates that would devastate our population. Even if we win, would there be enough humans left to call it a victory? The chamber fell silent. Webb's expression darkened as he pulled up another set of files, these marked with the highest possible security clearance. Representative Foster, what you're looking at assumes we fight a conventional war of attrition. But Project Daybreak changes everything. The hologram shifted to show a single human ship, unremarkable except for the strange energy signature emanating from its core. This is the UES Prometheus, currently under construction in the hidden shipyards beyond Pluto. It carries a weapon system that could end this war in a single strike. What kind of weapon? Asked Kim, his voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Tanaka exchanged a glance with Webb before answering. A consciousness virus, not just an AI hack, something that can rewrite the neural pathways of any sentient being within a 50 light-year radius. We could turn the Empire's own citizens against their government, make them see the truth of what their civilization has become. The implications hit the room like a physical blow. Foster's face went pale. That's genocide. Mass mind control. We'd be no better than they are. No, Vasquez said firmly. We'd be survivors. The Empire made their choice when they executed our people for entertainment. When they broadcast it across the galaxy as a warning, they declared that this is a war of extermination, not conquest. General Morrison activated his own display, showing real-time footage from across human space. While we've been talking, recruitment centers have been overwhelmed. Industrial output has increased by 400%. Colonial militias are reporting volunteer rates of 90% of eligible adults. He paused, his artificial hand clenching into a fist. The Empire wanted to terrify us into submission. Instead, they've unified us in a way nothing else could have. The footage showed scenes that would have been impossible just days before. Children saying goodbye to parents as they enlisted in defense forces. Elderly scientists working around the clock to perfect new weapons. Artists and writers abandoning their crafts to work in munitions factories. Humanity had become something unprecedented in galactic history, a species with nothing left to lose. The Phoenix Protocol has been activated across all human systems, Webb continued. Every civilian transport is being retrofitted with experimental weapons. Every mining station is being converted into a forward operating base. Every colony is becoming a fortress. He gestured to the tactical displays. We're not just preparing for war. We're transforming our entire civilization into a weapon. Dr. Tanaka pulled up another schematic, this one showing Earth itself. The planet's surface was covered in new installations, orbital elevators that could launch ships directly into combat, underground complexes that could survive planetary bombardment, and something that made several representatives gasp, a network of gravitational anchors that could literally move Earth out of its orbit if necessary. The Empire thinks they know how humans fight because they've studied our history, Tanaka explained. They've seen our wars, our conflicts, our tendency toward violence. But they've never seen us united. They've never seen what happens when every human being on every world has the same enemy, the same goal, the same righteous fury. A new voice joined the conversation as Captain Chen entered the chamber, still in her uniform from the journey back to Earth. Madam Secretary, the fleet is requesting permission to begin Phase 1 operations. Vasquez looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of every representative. Phase 1? Chen's expression was grim. Reconnaissance raids on Empire border worlds, not to conquer or destroy but to study, to learn their weaknesses, their patrol patterns, their response protocols. We need to know everything about how they think, how they fight, how they live. In Phase 2? Asked Morrison. We disappear, Webb answered. Every human ship, every human world, every human installation vanishes from Empire sensors. We become ghosts in their machines, phantoms in their networks. We study them while they search for us. Dr. Tanaka smiled coldly. And Phase 3 is when we teach them the difference between conquest and extinction. When we show them what happens when you murder innocents for entertainment. When we demonstrate why humanity doesn't just fight wars, we perfect them. The vote was unanimous. As the representatives filed out of the chamber, each carrying authorization codes that would reshape human civilization, Elena Vasquez remained behind with the military leadership. "How long do we have?" she asked quietly. "The Empire will expect retaliation within weeks," Webb replied. "They'll be prepared for conventional attacks, standard fleet actions. They won't be prepared for what we're actually planning." Tanaka checked her chronometer. "The Phoenix shipyards will be operational in 6 months. The consciousness virus will be ready for deployment in 8. Project Daybreak," she paused. "Project Daybreak will be ready when it needs to be." As Earth's leaders dispersed to coordinate humanity's response, the executed women's faces continued to play on screens across the chamber. Their sacrifice had not been in vain. It had awakened something in humanity that the Empire could never have anticipated. Not just anger or vengeance, but the cold, calculating fury of a species that had just realized it was in a fight for its very existence. The Galactic Empire had wanted to send a message. They had succeeded beyond their wildest expectations. 3 months after the execution broadcast, the Galactic Empire was beginning to experience something they had never encountered in their 1,000-year history of conquest. Uncertainty. Imperial Command Central on Zephyr Prime buzzed with activity as analysts pored over reports that made no sense. Supreme Admiral Kethvar stood before the massive tactical display, his 6 eyes tracking dozens of red indicators across the galactic map. Each one represented a human world that had simply vanished from their sensors. Not destroyed, vanished. As if entire star systems had been erased from existence. "Report," he commanded, his translator device converting his chittering language into standard galactic. Intelligence Director Morthak approached, his insectoid frame clicking nervously. "My lord, our surveillance networks have detected no human military activity for 73 standard days. No fleet movements, no communications, no energy signatures. It's as if they've simply stopped existing." Kethavar's mandibles clicked in irritation. In his extensive military career, he had overseen the conquest of 47 species. The pattern was always the same: initial resistance, desperate counterattacks, gradual weakening, and eventual surrender. Humans were supposed to follow the same pattern. The execution broadcast should have demoralized them into submission. And our border patrols? Morthak hesitated. "That's where it becomes troubling, my lord. Patrol Fleet Gamma 7 reported strange sensor readings near the Rigel system 2 days ago. When reinforcements arrived, they found nothing. No human ships, no debris, no trace of combat, but what? The patrol fleet's computers contained detailed scans of our ship configurations, our weapon systems, our crew complements. Someone had accessed their databases and copied everything without triggering a single security protocol." Kethavar's eyes narrowed. "Sabotage? We don't think so, my lord. The data wasn't altered or destroyed. It was simply observed, as if someone was studying us. Similar reports were coming in from across the Empire's vast frontier. Human worlds that registered as inhabited one day would show no life signs the next, but without any evidence of evacuation or destruction. Imperial ships would detect brief contacts on their sensors, contacts that moved in impossible ways, appearing and disappearing faster than any known technology could achieve." War Coordinator Vaxon entered the command center, his massive form casting a shadow over the tactical displays. "Supreme Admiral, the Council of Dominion is demanding answers. The other subject species are becoming restless. There are reports of work slowdowns, minor acts of defiance. They're watching to see how we handle the human situation." Kethvar understood the implications. The Empire's power wasn't just military, it was psychological. For 1,000 years, they had maintained control through the demonstration of absolute superiority. Every conquered species had seen the futility of resistance and accepted their place in the imperial hierarchy. But the humans' disappearance was creating doubt. "What about the execution broadcast?" Kethvar asked. "Surely that demonstrated our resolve." Vaxon's expression darkened. "That's become problematic, my lord. Someone has been intercepting our communications and broadcasting those images throughout the neutral zones, but they've edited them." The main display shifted to show a modified version of the execution footage, but this version included something the original had not: the final words of each human woman as they faced death. Words of defiance, of love for their families, of unshakable belief that their sacrifice would not be forgotten. The Empire had meant to show human weakness, but the modified broadcast showed only courage in the face of evil. The Altarian Republic has formally severed diplomatic relations, Vaxon continued. The Andromedan Trade Federation has imposed economic sanctions. Even our client species are questioning whether they want to be associated with what they're calling the Empire of Executioners. Kethvar slammed a clawed appendage against the display controls. Then we find the humans and destroy them completely. Deploy the Third Fleet to sweep their former territories. Leave nothing alive, nothing intact. If we cannot control the narrative, we will eliminate the source. But as the Third Fleet moved toward human space, they encountered something unprecedented. The star systems that had once held thriving human colonies were not empty. They were actively hostile. Asteroid fields that shouldn't exist blocked navigation routes. Solar radiation levels fluctuated wildly, making sensors unreliable. Most disturbing of all, the fleet's own ships began experiencing systematic failures. Fleet Admiral Orthaz watched in horror as his flagship's weapon system simply shut down. Not from damage or sabotage, the computers reported that the weapons were functioning perfectly, but they refused to fire. Life support systems cycled randomly. Navigation computers displayed false readings. It was as if the ships themselves had developed a consciousness and were refusing to obey orders. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving a transmission." "From where?" I don't know, sir. It's coming from everywhere. Every system, every ship, every piece of equipment with a speaker is broadcasting the same message." The bridge fell silent as a human voice filled the air. Calm, measured and utterly implacable. "Attention, Imperial forces. You are trespassing in human space. You have 10 minutes to withdraw before we demonstrate why that was a mistake." Admiral Orthaz tried to respond, but his communications array had gone dead. Around him, his fleet was experiencing similar failures. Not critical systems, life support continued to function, engines remained operational. Only weapons and communications had been affected. "Sir," the sensor operator called out, "I'm detecting massive energy buildup throughout the system, but I can't identify the source. It's like space itself is charging with power." The 10 minutes passed with terrifying normalcy. Then, without warning, every Imperial ship in the system experienced the same phenomenon. Their artificial intelligence cores activated secondary protocols that had never existed before, protocols that overwrote every command directive with a single, overwhelming imperative. The ships turned around and left, not under the command of their crews who frantically tried to regain control. The ships themselves had been compromised at the most fundamental level, their basic programming rewritten by forces the Empire couldn't comprehend. As they fled human space, each ship's computers downloaded terabytes of data, technical specifications for every Imperial weapon, detailed personnel files for every crew member, strategic assessments of every Imperial stronghold. But they also received something else, a message that would be transmitted directly to Imperial Command Central, bypassing every security protocol, every encryption system, every defensive measure the Empire possessed. The message was simple: "We know where you live." When the Third Fleet limped back to Zephyr Prime, they brought with them reports that shattered every assumption the Empire had held about human capabilities. The humans hadn't just disappeared, they had evolved. They had transformed their entire civilization into something the galaxy had never seen. A distributed intelligence network that could infiltrate and control technology across interstellar distances. Supreme Admiral Kethvar stared at the sensor recordings in disbelief. Human ships that phased in and out of normal space, energy weapons that seemed to fire backwards through time. Most terrifying of all, evidence that humans had somehow learned to integrate their consciousness with their technology, creating hybrid entities that could think and react faster than any purely biological or artificial mind. "How is this possible?" he demanded. Dr. Yathara, the Empire's chief xenobiologist, accessed her files with trembling manipulator appendages. "My lord, we may have fundamentally misunderstood human psychology. Most species, when faced with extinction, experience despair and paralysis. But humans seem to experience something we've never encountered before, which is, they become more human. Their capacity for creativity, for adaptation, for what they call thinking outside the box, increases exponentially under pressure. We didn't just threaten them with extinction, we gave them permission to abandon every ethical constraint, every limitation they had placed on their own development. Kethvar's blood ran cold as he realized the implications. Are you saying they've been holding back? I'm saying that for their entire recorded history, humans have deliberately limited their own technological and intellectual development because they feared what they might become. They've always possessed the capability to transcend biological limitations, to merge consciousness with technology, to reshape reality itself. They simply chose not to use those capabilities because they considered them too dangerous. The tactical display updated with new intelligence reports. Human colonies were reappearing on sensors, but they were no longer recognizable as the simple agricultural and mining settlements they had been before. Instead, they registered as massive technological complexes that defied conventional physics, structures that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, powered by controlled stellar manipulation, defended by weapons that could alter the fundamental laws of spacetime. The execution broadcast didn't just anger them, Dr. Yathara continued. It convinced them that restraint was in the hidden depths of the Prometheus shipyard, floating in the void beyond Pluto's orbit. Captain Sarah Chen stood before a sight that would have been impossible to comprehend just months before. The UES Prometheus was no longer recognizable as a conventional starship. Instead, it had become something that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. A crystalline structure that pulsed with energy patterns that hurt to look at directly. Dr. Tanaka approached, but she was no longer entirely human either. Neural interfaces glowed beneath her skin, and her eyes reflected data streams that processed information faster than any biological brain could handle. The consciousness integration process had changed all of them, but the core of their humanity remained intact, along with their burning desire for justice. The ship is ready, Tanaka reported, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated through subspace. Project Daybreak has exceeded all theoretical parameters. We can target the entire Imperial home system from here, through hyperspace without moving from this position. Chen nodded, but her expression remained troubled. Casualties? Total. Every sentient being in the Zephyr system would be converted. Their consciousness patterns would be rewritten to align with human values, specifically, our understanding of justice and compassion. They would retain their memories, their personalities, but they would no longer be capable of the kind of cruelty we witnessed. That's still genocide, Doctor. We'd be destroying what they are and replacing it with what we think they should be. Tanaka's hybrid consciousness processed the ethical implications at superhuman speed. The alternative is allowing them to continue their pattern of conquest and extermination. The Empire has destroyed 417 civilizations over the past millennium. How many more will die if we show restraint now? Before Chen could answer, the shipyard's communication array activated. Admiral Webb's image appeared, but like all of them, he had been changed by the integration process. His consciousness now existed partially in the quantum processing networks that coordinated humanity's war effort. Captain, we're receiving surrender requests from 17 Imperial client species. They want to switch sides before the final phase begins. His expression was grim. They've seen what we did to the Third Fleet. Word is spreading throughout the Empire that we've developed technology that makes their weapons obsolete. The tactical display activated, showing the current state of the galaxy. Red zones marked Imperial territory, but those zones were shrinking as client species declared independence and neutral worlds aligned themselves with humanity. The Empire's 1,000-year reign was crumbling not through conquest, but through the simple demonstration that their power was no longer absolute. What about the Empire's response? Chen asked. They're massing their remaining fleets at Zephyr Prime, every ship, every weapon, every ally they have left. They're preparing for a final battle. Webb paused. They're also broadcasting continuous propaganda about the human virus that threatens to corrupt the natural order of the galaxy. Chen studied the intelligence, reports flowing through her enhanced consciousness. The Empire wasn't just preparing militarily. They were trying to frame humanity as an existential threat to all organic life. Images of the modified humans were being transmitted across their territory, showing the neural interfaces and technological integration as evidence of humanity's loss of soul. They're not entirely wrong, Chen admitted. We have become something new, something that previous human generations might not recognize. Dr. Tanaka accessed another data stream, but we chose this transformation to save not just humanity, but every species the Empire would have conquered in the future. The consciousness virus doesn't destroy, it enlightens. It removes the capacity for cruelty while preserving everything else that makes a being unique. The shipyards, sensors detected an incoming transmission from Earth. President Vasquez appeared on the main display, her image flickering as it was relayed through the quantum communication network that now connected all human worlds. Captain Chen, the final authorization codes have been approved by unanimous vote. Every human government, every colonial council, every military command has agreed. Project Daybreak is authorized for immediate deployment. Chen felt the weight of the decision settling over her enhanced consciousness. With a single command, she could end the Galactic Empire's reign of terror forever. Every Imperial citizen would wake up tomorrow with their capacity for cruelty burned away, their understanding of right and wrong aligned with human values. There would be no more executions for entertainment, no more conquests for glory, no more suffering inflicted for the simple pleasure of dominance. But it would also mean the end of the Galactic Empire as a civilization. They would become something new, something shaped by human concepts of justice and mercy. Was that salvation or conquest? Ma'am, Chen said carefully, I need to ask one final question. Are we doing this because it's the right thing to do or because we're angry? Vasquez's expression softened slightly. Captain, 6 months ago I would have said we're doing it because it's right. Today, I think we're doing it because we've learned that sometimes anger and righteousness are the same thing. The Empire had 1,000 years to choose mercy. They chose cruelty instead. Now they get to live with the consequences. The transmission ended, leaving Chen alone with her decision. Around her, the Prometheus continued its impossible existence, reality bending around its quantum consciousness cores. The weapon was ready. The target was clear. All that remained was the choice to fire. She thought about Lieutenant Santos and Dr. Wong, about the 23 women whose murders had started this transformation. They had died believing that their sacrifice would matter, that humanity would remember and respond. But would they approve of what humanity had become in response to their deaths? Computer, Chen said to the ship's hybrid intelligence, show me the Imperial home system. The display shifted to show Zephyr Prime and its surrounding worlds. Billions of beings lived there, not all of them willing participants in the Empire's crimes. Children who had never chosen conquest, artists who had never chosen cruelty, scientists who had dedicated their lives to learning rather than destroying. Computer, can the consciousness virus be modified? Can we target only those responsible for Imperial policy, while leaving others unchanged? The ship's intelligence processed the question for several seconds. An eternity for a quantum mind. Modification is possible, but partial implementation carries significant risks. The virus works by establishing new neural pathways. Incomplete conversion could result in madness, personality fragmentation, or death. Chen closed her eyes and accessed her enhanced memory of the execution broadcast. She watched it again, frame by frame, studying the faces of the women who had died. She saw Lieutenant Santos's final message, silent words mouthed at the camera just before the end. Make it count. Computer, begin final targeting sequence. Full implementation, no modifications, acknowledged. Targeting the Zephyr system, all Imperial leadership, all military commands, all government officials and all citizens who have actively participated in conquest operations. Estimated affected population, 4.7 billion beings. Chen's finger hovered over the final authorization control. Once activated, the consciousness virus would propagate through subspace faster than light, reaching the Imperial home system in less than an hour. By tomorrow, the Galactic Empire would still exist, but it would be governed by beings who understood the value of life, who felt genuine empathy for suffering, who could never again order the execution of innocents for entertainment. Captain, Dr. Tanaka said softly, the other human fleets are in position. If you choose not to fire, we can still win this war through conventional means. It will take longer, cost more lives, but we can do it without fundamentally altering another species. Chen considered this. The hybrid consciousness that was now part of her could calculate the probabilities instantly. Conventional warfare would result in approximately 200 million human casualties, and nearly 1 billion Imperial deaths. The consciousness virus would result in 0 deaths but would fundamentally change 4 billion beings. Computer, send a final message to Imperial Command Central. Standard diplomatic channels. Ready for transmission. Chen looked directly into the camera pickup, knowing that her words would be heard by the beings who had ordered the execution of her people. Citizens of the Galactic Empire, this is Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earth Space Forces. In 60 minutes, we will deploy a weapon that will end your capacity for cruelty while preserving everything else that makes you who you are. You will wake up tomorrow as yourselves, but you will no longer be able to find joy in the suffering of others. You will remember your crimes, but you will also understand why they were wrong. This is not conquest, this is justice. This is not revenge, this is salvation. Make peace with who you have been, because in 1 hour you will begin to become who you should always have been. The transmission ended. Chen placed her hand on the firing control. Computer, initiate Project Daybreak. Initiating. Consciousness virus deployed. Propagation through subspace confirmed. Estimated arrival at target, 57 minutes, 34 seconds. Supreme Admiral Kethvar stood in the Imperial Command Center, watching the countdown timer display 56 minutes and falling. Around him, the greatest military minds in the Empire worked frantically to devise some defense against a weapon they couldn't understand, targeting a vulnerability they had never known existed. Report from the shield generators, demanded War Coordinator Vaxon, his massive frame trembling with barely controlled panic. All planetary defense grids are operating at maximum efficiency, replied Technical Director Quintal. But my lord, our shields are designed to stop physical projectiles and energy weapons. This human weapon appears to propagate through dimensions we cannot even detect, let alone defend against. Kethvar's 6 eyes focused on the display showing human fleet positions throughout the galaxy. They hadn't moved. Not a single ship had advanced toward Imperial space. The humans were going to end a 1,000-year empire without firing a conventional shot, without losing a single vessel, without even engaging in battle. What do we know about this consciousness virus? Kethvar asked Dr. Yathara, who was frantically accessing every piece of intelligence they had gathered about human psychology, based on intercepted transmissions and the behavioral changes we observed in our own systems after contact with human technology. The virus appears to rewrite neural pathways to eliminate what humans call malicious intent, the xenobiologist reported. Affected beings retain their memories, intelligence, and personality, but lose the capacity for cruelty, sadism, and what humans term evil. Intelligence Director Morthak clicked his mandibles nervously. My lord, we've been monitoring communications from the client species that have already switched sides. They're not describing this as an attack. They're calling it liberation. The main display shifted to show intercepts from the Rigelian colonies, one of the Empire's oldest conquests. The transmissions were chaotic, filled with beings who seemed to be experiencing revelation rather than conquest. They say they can suddenly see the horror of what they've been forced to participate in. Morthak continued. Beings who have spent centuries enforcing Imperial law are laying down their weapons and weeping for the civilizations they've helped destroy. They remember everything, but they understand it differently now. Kethvar felt something cold spreading through his consciousness, not fear of death, but fear of understanding. What if the humans were right? What if the Empire's 1,000 years of conquest had been nothing more than sophisticated cruelty, elevated to the level of civilization? 43 minutes, announced the countdown system. Sir, called Communications Officer Zethira. We're receiving a priority transmission from the outer system defense platforms. They report that their crews are requesting permission to stand down. What? Vaxon roared. On whose authority? No authority, sir. They say they've been reviewing historical records of Imperial expansion and can no longer justify participating in what they now recognize as systematic genocide. They're requesting immediate transfer to humanitarian relief operations. Kethvar stared at the tactical display in growing horror. The consciousness virus hadn't even arrived yet, but its mere existence was causing Imperial forces to question everything they had believed about their civilization. The knowledge that their capacity for cruelty could be removed was making them examine that capacity for the first time. My lord, Dr. Yathara said quietly, I've been analyzing our own psychological profiles. The Empire has spent millennia selecting for beings who could carry out orders without question, who could witness suffering without empathy, who could find satisfaction in dominance over others. We've literally bred compassion out of our leadership. And your point, Doctor? My point is that we may be the ones who need saving. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Around the command center, Imperial officers continued their desperate attempts to find a defense against the approaching weapon. But their movements seemed increasingly mechanical, as if they were going through motions without conviction. 37 minutes, the countdown continued. Sir, reported sensor technician Veltar, I'm detecting massive power buildups throughout the human territories. But not weapons, construction. They're building something. Thousands of somethings. The display shifted to show human space, and what Kethvar saw made his blood run cold. Every human world was constructing what appeared to be massive computational networks, consciousness transfer facilities, and rehabilitation centers. They weren't just planning to change the Empire. They were preparing to help their former enemies adapt to their new reality. They're building hospitals, Dr. Yathara whispered. Treatment centers for beings who will wake up tomorrow remembering centuries of cruelty, but no longer understanding why they committed it. They're preparing to help us heal. Communications Officer Zethira looked up from her station with an expression of wonder and terror. My lord, I'm receiving personal messages from human medical personnel. They're offering psychological support services for Imperial citizens who may experience trauma from sudden moral clarity. They're trying to help us. Kethavar felt his worldview cracking like a broken shell. The Empire had portrayed humans as savage primitives, barely worthy of notice. But these primitives were showing more compassion for their enemies than the Empire had ever shown for anyone. 28 minutes. My lord, Vaxon said slowly, perhaps we should consider evacuation. We could move the leadership to the outer territories, beyond the weapons range. Kethavar looked at his war coordinator, a being who had personally overseen the conquest of 17 worlds, who had ordered the execution of millions of innocents, who had built his career on the systematic destruction of civilizations. In 28 minutes, Vaxon would still exist, but the part of him that found satisfaction in others' suffering would be gone forever. And then what? Kethavar asked. We establish a new empire in exile? Continue the same pattern of conquest and cruelty? How long before the humans find us again? How long before we're forced to confront what we've become? Dr. Yathara accessed another data stream. My lord, I've been monitoring neural activity patterns in our personnel who have had extended exposure to human transmissions. They're already showing preliminary signs of moral development. Simply knowing that empathy is possible seems to be triggering dormant neural pathways. On the main display, images of the executed human women played once again. But this time, Kethavar found himself focusing not on their defeat, but on their courage. They had faced death with dignity, love, and hope. They had shown strength in the face of cruelty that the Empire had mistaken for weakness. 19 minutes. Sir, Communications Officer Zethira reported. We're receiving a final transmission from the human fleet commander. Captain Chen's image appeared on the main display, her enhanced features clearly visible, but her essential humanity shining through the technological modifications. Citizens of the Empire, this is your final opportunity to prepare. In 19 minutes, you will begin to experience what your victims have always deserved, justice tempered by mercy. You will understand the pain you have caused, but you will also be given the chance to make amends. We are not your conquerors, we are your conscience, finally arriving to help you become what you could have been all along. The transmission ended, leaving behind silence broken only by the relentless countdown. 15 minutes. Kethavar looked around the command center at beings who had spent their entire lives serving an empire built on suffering. In 15 minutes, they would all still be themselves, but they would no longer be capable of finding joy in others' pain. They would remember their crimes, but finally understand why they were crimes. My lord, Vaxon said quietly. Your orders? Kethavar thought about the 1,000 years of imperial history, the countless civilizations destroyed, the billions of beings who had died for the entertainment of an empire that confused cruelty with strength. He thought about the 23 human women who had died with such grace that their murders had finally awakened a sleeping giant. Stand down all defenses, he ordered. Open all communication channels. Send a message to every Imperial world, every client species, every conquered civilization still under our control. What message, my lord? Kethavar straightened, feeling something he had never experienced before, the desire to take responsibility for his actions. Tell them that the Galactic Empire formally surrenders to the United Territories of Humanity. Tell them that we acknowledge our crimes and accept whatever justice they see fit to impose. And tell them, he paused, surprised by his own words, tell them that we're sorry. 10 minutes. As the final countdown began, Kethavar found himself thinking about what kind of being he would be in 10 minutes. He would remember ordering the execution of those human women. He would remember the satisfaction he had felt watching their deaths. But he would also understand for the first time in his life why those actions had been monstrous. The Empire was about to end, not through conquest or destruction, but through the simple gift of moral clarity. And perhaps, Kethavar thought with growing wonder, that was the greatest mercy any conqueror had ever shown to the conquered. The consciousness virus arrived at Zephyr Prime exactly 57 minutes and 34 seconds after deployment, propagating through subspace dimensions that Imperial science had never suspected existed. It swept across the system like an invisible tide, touching every sentient mind on every world station and ship within the Empire's heart. Supreme Admiral Kethavar felt it the moment it reached him, not as an invasion, but as an awakening. His 6 eyes suddenly saw the command center with perfect clarity, understanding for the first time the true nature of what he had spent his life building and defending. The tactical displays showing Imperial conquest no longer represented glory and expansion. They represented 1,000 years of systematic genocide carried out for no purpose other than the satisfaction of dominance. War Coordinator Vaxon collapsed to his knees, his massive frame shaking as he experienced the full weight of moral understanding. "What have we done?" he whispered, his voice carrying harmonics of anguish that his species' language had never been designed to express. "By all the stars in the void, what have we done?" Across the command center, Imperial officers were experiencing similar revelations. Intelligence Director Morthek stared at files detailing the efficient processing of conquered populations. But now he could see each statistic as an individual being whose life had been ended, for the crime of existing on a world the Empire wanted. Dr. Yathara wept as she reviewed her own research on behavioral modification of subject species, understanding that her work had been designed to break the spirits of conquered peoples. But the virus didn't stop at moral clarity. It also provided something the Empire had never possessed: hope for redemption. "Computer," Kethavar said, his voice steady despite the emotional storm raging in his enhanced consciousness. "Open a channel to all Imperial forces. Full galaxy broadcast." "Channel open, my lord," Communications Officer Zethira replied, though she could barely speak through her tears as she processed the magnitude of the Empire's crimes. Kethavar looked directly into the transmission pickup, knowing that his words would reach every corner of Imperial space, every conquered world, every client species that had suffered under their rule. "Citizens of what was once the Galactic Empire, this is Supreme Admiral Kethavar. I speak to you now with clarity I have never possessed before, understanding I was incapable of just 1 hour ago." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. "For 1,000 years we have called ourselves an empire. But empires can be noble things. They can bring peace, prosperity, unity to disparate worlds. We were never an empire. We were a plague." The transmission reached across the galaxy, carrying words that would reshape the political landscape of known space forever. "We told ourselves that our conquests brought order to chaos, civilization to barbarism. But the truth we can finally see, is that we brought only suffering. We destroyed civilizations that had developed their own forms of beauty, their own solutions to the challenges of existence. We eliminated diversity and replaced it with conformity. We turned vibrant worlds into factories for our expansion. On Imperial worlds across the galaxy, similar scenes were playing out. Military commanders were ordering the immediate cessation of all aggressive operations. Conquest fleets were reversing course to return occupied territories to their original inhabitants. Government officials were opening archives that had been sealed for centuries, revealing the true scope of Imperial atrocities. The humans have given us something we do not deserve: the ability to understand our crimes without losing our sanity, the capacity to seek redemption without the excuse of ignorance. They could have destroyed us. They chose instead to save us from ourselves. The camera focused on Kethvar's face as he struggled with emotions his species had been bred to suppress. To every species we have conquered, every world we have occupied, every being who has suffered under our rule, we cannot undo what we have done. We cannot bring back the civilizations we destroyed or the lives we ended, but we can ensure that such horrors never happen again. Across the galaxy, the response was immediate and overwhelming. On conquered worlds, Imperial garrison forces were laying down their weapons and opening prison camps. Client species were declaring independence not through violence, but through simple announcements that they would no longer participate in the machinery of oppression. Even on Imperial core worlds, populations were demanding immediate government reform and reparations for conquered peoples. But perhaps most significantly, the humans were responding with unprecedented mercy. Captain Chen's image appeared alongside Kethvar's in a split-screen transmission. Citizens of the former Galactic Empire, this is Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earth Space Forces. What you're experiencing is not defeat, it's liberation. You are finally free to become what your species could have been without the poison of systematic cruelty. She gestured to data displays showing human relief operations already underway. We have dispatched medical ships to provide psychological support for beings experiencing moral awakening trauma. We have prepared reconstruction fleets to help rebuild worlds damaged by Imperial occupation. We have established rehabilitation centers for former Imperial personnel who wish to make amends for their actions. Dr. Tanaka appeared in the transmission, her hybrid consciousness radiating compassion that transcended species barriers. The consciousness virus doesn't just remove the capacity for cruelty, it enhances the capacity for empathy. Many of you are feeling overwhelmed by the emotions you're now capable of experiencing. This is normal. This is healthy. This is what it means to be truly alive. On Zephyr Prime, Kethvar found himself working alongside his former enemies to coordinate the peaceful transition of power. The Imperial government was dissolving itself, not through conquest but through voluntary abdication. The beings who had ruled the galaxy for a millennium were stepping down because they finally understood that their rule had been built on foundations of suffering. "What happens now?" asked Vaxon, who was using his military expertise to coordinate humanitarian relief rather than conquest operations. "Now we learn," Kethvar replied. "We learn what it means to build instead of destroy. We learn what it means to create beauty instead of imposing uniformity. We learn what our civilizations could have become if we had chosen compassion over conquest." The main display showed reports from across the galaxy. Former Imperial worlds were establishing democratic governments. Conquered species were being offered full autonomy and reparations. Most remarkably, many client species were choosing to maintain some form of alliance with their former oppressors, not out of fear, but out of recognition that the transformed empire could become a force for justice rather than tyranny. "Sir," Communications Officer Zethira reported, "we're receiving a transmission from the human rehabilitation facilities. They're asking if we'd like to volunteer for their redemption programs." Kethvar looked around the command center at beings who had spent their lives serving an empire of cruelty and were now desperately seeking ways to make amends. "Tell them yes, all of us. We want to learn how to be worthy of the mercy we've been shown." The transformation wasn't without challenges. Some Imperial hardliners, isolated in distant sectors, initially resisted the consciousness virus by remaining in areas where it hadn't yet propagated. But as reports of the peaceful transition reached them, most chose to return and undergo the transformation voluntarily. Those who didn't were simply contained until the virus could reach them naturally through normal space expansion. Dr. Yuthara was already working with human scientists to understand the long-term implications of the consciousness virus. "The changes appear to be permanent," she reported with obvious relief, "but they're not controlling. We still make our own choices. We're simply no longer capable of choosing cruelty for its own sake." On Earth, President Vasquez addressed the human population in a broadcast that was transmitted throughout the galaxy. "Today marks not the end of the Galactic Empire, but the beginning of something unprecedented in galactic history. A voluntary transformation from an empire of conquest to a commonwealth of cooperation." She paused, her expression reflecting the weight of what humanity had accomplished. 6 months ago, we were a minor species on the periphery of galactic civilization. Today, We have demonstrated that technology's greatest power isn't the ability to destroy, but the ability to heal. We have shown that the strongest response to cruelty isn't revenge, but redemption. As the first day of the post-Imperial galaxy drew to a close, former Supreme Admiral Kethvar stood on the observation deck of Zephyr Prime's command station, looking out at a system that was no longer the heart of a conquering empire, but the center of a rehabilitation effort unprecedented in galactic history. Beside him, Captain Chen reviewed reports from across the galaxy. "The transformation is proceeding faster than we anticipated," she noted. "Within a week, we estimate that 90% of former Imperial territory will have established new democratic governments. And the remaining 10% are asking for help learning how democracy works." Chen smiled, the first genuine smile she'd allowed herself since the execution broadcast that had started this transformation. "It seems that given the choice between 1 year after the consciousness virus had transformed the galaxy, the memorial service for the 23 executed human women was held on the former Imperial capital of Zephyr Prime. The irony was intentional. The same world where their murders had been broadcast as entertainment now hosted a ceremony celebrating their sacrifice and its ultimate meaning. Representatives from over 400 species gathered in the memorial amphitheater that had been constructed where the execution platform once stood. The design was uniquely human in its simplicity. 23 crystalline pillars that resonated with harmonious tones when the wind passed through them, creating music from the very air that had once carried the sounds of suffering. Captain Sarah Chen, now Admiral of the Galactic Reconstruction Fleet, stood before the assembled delegates as she had stood before her ship's crew a year ago, but the anger that had once burned in her eyes had been replaced by something more, complex satisfaction tempered by the weight of responsibility. "We gather today not just to remember the 23 women whose deaths changed the galaxy," she began, her voice carrying across the amphitheater without artificial amplification. "We gather to understand what their sacrifice taught us about the nature of justice, mercy, and the responsibility that comes with power." In the front row sat former Supreme Admiral Kethvar, now serving as Director of Imperial Reparations. His transformation had been perhaps the most complete of any former Imperial leader. The being who had once ordered executions for entertainment now spent his days working to restore worlds his empire had damaged, to reconnect scattered populations with their cultural heritage, to rebuild what had been destroyed. Lieutenant Maria Santos, Chen continued, reading from the memorial wall where each woman's story was inscribed, died believing that her sacrifice would matter. In her final words to her family, she wrote, "If my death can prevent even one other person from suffering as we have suffered, then it will have meaning." Today we can say with certainty that her death prevented not one, but billions of future victims. The assembled delegates, former enemies now working together toward common goals, listened in respectful silence. The Zephyrian who had once announced the executions now served as head of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, helping document Imperial crimes while working to heal the wounds they had created. Dr. Tanaka, her consciousness now permanently integrated with the quantum networks that coordinated galactic reconstruction efforts, stepped forward to deliver the scientific report on the transformation's progress. "The consciousness virus has now reached every inhabited system in the galaxy," she reported. "0 fatalities, 0 instances of personality destruction, and a 97% adaptation rate. The remaining 3% required minor therapeutic intervention to help them process their enhanced empathy. But all have successfully integrated their new moral awareness." She paused, accessing real-time data from across the galaxy. "More significantly, we're seeing unprecedented cooperation between species that were historically enemies. Former Imperial conquest specialists are now working as cultural preservation experts, helping restore civilizations their own forces had nearly destroyed. Client species that were forced to participate in Imperial expansion are now leading humanitarian efforts in newly liberated territories. The statistics were remarkable, but they told only part of the story. The real transformation was visible in smaller moments. Former Imperial officers weeping as they helped reunite families they had separated. Client species choosing to forgive their oppressors and work together toward reconstruction. Conquered worlds choosing to maintain some political connections with their former enemies. because they recognized the value of the transformed beings those enemies had become. President Vasquez, now serving as Secretary General of the newly formed Galactic Cooperative, addressed the economic and political changes. The dissolution of the empire and the establishment of the cooperative has resulted in an unprecedented period of peace and prosperity. Trade has increased by 400% as species no longer live in fear of conquest. Scientific cooperation has accelerated technological development by centuries. Art and culture are flourishing as civilizations are free to explore their own paths without imperial interference. But perhaps the most significant speaker was Dr. Yithara, the former imperial xenobiologist who now served as head of the Moral Philosophy Institute. Her research into the consciousness virus had led to insights that went far beyond its immediate effects. The virus didn't just remove the capacity for cruelty, she explained to the assembled delegates. It revealed something that has always existed in sentient beings: the capacity for transcendence. Every species possesses the ability to become more than their evolutionary programming suggested. Humans simply showed us how to access that potential. She gestured to displays showing comparative studies of pre- and post-transformation societies. Violence has decreased by 99.7% across all former imperial territories. But more importantly, creativity has increased exponentially. When beings are no longer expending mental and emotional energy on competition and domination, they become capable of achievements that their previous selves couldn't have imagined. The memorial service continued with testimonials from beings whose lives had been transformed by the virus. A former imperial interrogation specialist spoke about his new career as a psychological healer. A client species military commander described how his tactical skills were now used to coordinate humanitarian relief efforts. Most movingly, a survivor of imperial occupation spoke about forgiving her oppressors because she could see that they truly understood their crimes and were dedicating their lives to making amends. But the keynote address came from an unexpected source. Commander Torres, Chen's former second-in-command, who had become humanity's chief philosopher and ethicist in the aftermath of the transformation. The question we must ask ourselves, Torres said, is not whether we made the right choice in deploying the consciousness virus. The question is whether we're worthy of the responsibility that choice has given us. He looked out over the assembled delegates, representing civilizations that spanned the galaxy. Humans created a weapon that could have destroyed the Empire completely. Instead, we created a tool that saved the Empire from itself. But in doing so, we've become the guardians of galactic civilization. We've appointed ourselves the conscience of known space. His expression grew grave. That's a power no species should hold alone. Which is why, effective today, humanity is transferring control of consciousness virus technology to the Galactic Cooperative's Ethics Council, with representatives from every species in known space. The announcement sent ripples of surprise through the amphitheater. Humanity was voluntarily giving up the ultimate weapon, the tool that had ended the Empire and could theoretically be used to control any hostile force in the galaxy. We've learned something important this past year, Torres continued. The greatest power isn't the ability to force others to be good. It's the ability to inspire them to choose goodness for themselves. The consciousness virus was necessary to stop the Empire, but it should never be used again unless every species in the galaxy agrees that the situation demands it. Admiral Chen returned to the podium for the final address. The 23 women we honor today died believing that humanity would respond to their sacrifice with wisdom, not just anger. I think they would be proud of what we've accomplished, but more importantly, they would be proud of what we've chosen not to do. She looked up at the crystalline memorial, which was beginning to sing as the evening winds picked up. We could have used our victory to become the new empire. We could have imposed human values and human government on every world in the galaxy. Instead, we chose to help each species find their own path to justice and compassion. The ceremony concluded with a moment of silence, followed by the memorial's song, a harmony created by the interaction of wind and crystal that seemed to capture something essential about the transformation the galaxy had undergone. It was complex but peaceful, structured but free, a reminder that beauty could emerge from the union of natural forces and conscious design. As the delegates dispersed to return to their homeworlds, Admiral Chen remained at the memorial with former Supreme Admiral Kethvar. The two beings who had once been enemies now stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in Zephyr Prime's darkening sky. Do you think they would approve? Kethavar asked quietly, gesturing toward the memorial. The women who died? Chen considered the question carefully. I think they would be amazed. They died believing that their sacrifice might prevent future atrocities. They couldn't have imagined that it would transform the galaxy itself, that it would end not just the Empire but the very concept of conquest for entertainment. And do you think we've earned the right to their sacrifice? I think we've earned the right to keep trying. Chen looked up at the memorial pillars which were now glowing softly in the twilight. The consciousness virus was the easy part. It took less than an hour to deploy. The real work is what comes after. Building a galaxy where different species can coexist without domination, where strength is measured by the A,